The sun was unforgiving that afternoon, hanging high in a cloudless sky over East Mill Street, where the pavement shimmered with heat and the air smelled faintly of exhaust and frying food from a nearby taco stand. Officer Darren Holtz sat in the driver's seat of his patrol car, engine humming softly, fingers drumming against the steering wheel. It was his usual beat, his turf, as he liked to think of it, and he approached it with the same smug authority every day. The neighborhood, mostly black and Latino, had never felt like his community. To Darren, it was a place to keep under control, a place where trouble lingered in every alley and porch shadow. He didn't speak much when he patrolled. He preferred gestures, commands, a scowl behind his mirrored sunglasses. People here knew better than to provoke him. He wasn't shy about flexing his power, whether it was pulling over a car for no reason or detaining someone for acting suspicious. And when they protested, when they asked for a reason or dared to question him, he had a phrase he liked to use. Complain all you want. I wear the badge. That day, as he turned the corner near the local community center, something caught his attention. A small crowd, maybe 10 or 12 kids, gathered around a man who stood by the steps in a dark blue tailored suit. Darren slowed the cruiser to a crawl. The man was black, mid-40s maybe, tall, with a clean-shaven head and a composed demeanor. He didn't look like he was from the area. He was speaking to the kids, gesturing occasionally, and they listened intently. Darren didn't like it. He couldn't hear what the man was saying, but it didn't matter. People like that, well-dressed strangers, didn't belong on his beat unless they were lost or up to something. He pulled over abruptly, parking just a few feet from the group. The kids turned to look. The man stopped talking but didn't move. Darren stepped out slowly, hand resting near his holster, the way he always did. He adjusted his belt and walked toward them, a sneer forming under his mustache. "Hey, you!" he barked, pointing at the man in the suit. "What's going on here?" The man turned to face him directly, unfazed. "Just speaking to the youth," he replied calmly. "We were talking about leadership, about responsibility." "Uh-huh," Darren said, glancing at the kids, then back to the man. "You got a permit to do that? Because this looks like an unauthorized gathering to me." The kids glanced at each other nervously. The man didn't flinch. "We're just talking," he said again. "Nothing more." Darren took a step closer, eyes narrowing. "I didn't ask for a lecture. I said clear out." The man raised an eyebrow. "I'm not obstructing anything, officer. If you believe otherwise, feel free to call it in." That was enough to set Darren off. This guy wasn't just refusing to bow his head, he was daring to hold his ground. Darren's jaw tightened. His authority was being challenged, and in front of a dozen impressionable kids, no less. He took another step forward until he was just inches from the man, his voice dropping low. "You think you're better than me or something?" "No," the man replied evenly. "I think we should be better for them," he said, nodding toward the kids. That was the moment Darren made a decision, one he wouldn't be able to take back. He leaned in, curled his lip, and spit. It landed, partly on the man's brown leather shoe and partly on the pavement. A murmur rippled through the children, some gasping, others instinctively stepping back. The man looked down at the spit, then slowly raised his eyes to meet Darren's. His expression didn't change, no anger, no fear, just something deeper, like disappointment carved in stone. Darren grunted, straightened up, and muttered, "You people always looking for a reason to act like victims." He turned and walked back to his cruiser, leaving behind silence so thick it clung to the air. The man didn't speak again. He simply pulled out a handkerchief, wiped his shoe, and nodded to the kids. "Remember what I said," he told them. "No matter what happens, carry yourself with dignity." The kids followed him with their eyes as he walked away, tall and proud, disappearing around the corner. Darren didn't look back as he drove off. He didn't need to. He felt satisfied, like he'd reminded someone of their place. What he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that everything about that interaction had just been burned into the memory of everyone who had witnessed it. Every child who stood on those steps would remember the moment a man of calm strength had been spat on by someone who was supposed to serve and protect. And they would also remember how he hadn't raised his voice, hadn't struck back, hadn't even looked away. Darren, meanwhile, felt invincible as he drove the rest of his shift. The incident already fading in his mind, chalked up as just another Tuesday. In his world, consequences were something that happened to other people. And if that man filed a complaint, let him. The system always had Darren's back. But just around the corner, on the other side of the city, a very different conversation was already taking place. A name had been confirmed, a face had been recognized. And fate, as it so often does in moments like these, was quietly setting the stage. Morning sunlight filtered through the frosted windows of the precinct, casting soft golden squares across the tiled floor. Inside, the station buzzed with a strange kind of energy, subtle but noticeable. Officers leaned in closer during conversations. Phones rang unanswered a little longer. There was talk, rumors mainly, floating through the air like smoke from a distant fire. Word was, the city had finally made its decision. The months-long search for a new police chief was over. The announcement was supposed to happen today. Darren Holtz didn't care. He was slouched in a plastic chair in the break room, sipping burnt coffee from a styrofoam cup, scrolling through his phone. Whatever changes came with the new chief, Darren figured they wouldn't affect him. They never did. New bosses came and went, mouthing promises about reform and community relations, but in the end they always relied on guys like Darren to keep the streets quiet. They talked about bridges and trust, but when things got messy, they turned to the heavy boots and the hard stares. Darren knew how the system worked. He'd been a part of it for over a decade. He smirked as he read through a text from a fellow officer. "Bet it's just another suit from downtown trying to play hero." Darren chuckled under his breath. That's how it always was. Some outsider with no street smarts, trying to tell real cops how to do the job. They'd talk a big game at first, then slowly fade into the background. It didn't matter who they picked. Darren wasn't going anywhere. Just then, the door to the break room creaked open. Captain Riley stepped in, looking more formal than usual. Pressed uniform, polished shoes. His face was unreadable, but his tone was crisp and loud. "Everyone, conference, room, now, meet the new chief." Darren took his time standing. He threw away his cup and followed the others down the hallway. Conversations dimmed as they filed in, about 24 officers filling the space. The air was thick with curiosity and a touch of skepticism. Everyone wanted to see who would be leading them now. The door at the front of the room opened. Captain Riley stepped aside. In walked a man dressed in full police chief uniform, deep navy blues, silver stars on the collar, nameplate gleaming on the chest. His posture was perfect, commanding, but not forced. His presence made people straighten in their seats without realizing it. He walked with calm assurance to the front of the room and turned to face the officers. Darren's heart stopped. It was him. The man from the community center, the one Darren had spat on the day before, the one he had humiliated in front of children. "Chief." Marcus Tate looked across the room, his face composed. There was no trace of smugness or revenge in his expression, just calm certainty. But for Darren, it felt like standing in the middle of an earthquake. He swallowed hard. His mouth went dry. He tried to glance away but found himself locked in place. Captain Riley cleared his throat and gestured toward the new chief. "Everyone, this is Chief Marcus Tate. He served over 20 years in community-based law enforcement, most recently as Deputy Commissioner in Houston. He's here to lead us into the next chapter, and I expect you'll treat him with the respect he's earned." Chief Tate nodded once, then began speaking. "Thank you, Captain. Good morning, officers. I won't take up too much of your time. Today, I know change makes people uncomfortable, and words mean very little until they're backed by action. So I won't stand here and make empty promises." His voice was deep, steady, with a tone that commanded attention without demanding it. "What I will say," he continued, "is that this department has been under national scrutiny. Community trust is at a breaking point. But I didn't come here to play politics. I came here to rebuild something, starting with how we treat the people we serve." There was a pause, a silence so still it almost rang in Darren's ears. "We are not at war with our community," the chief said. "We are part of it." Darren felt a bead of sweat form at his temple. Marcus Tate didn't even look in his direction. When the meeting ended, officers filtered out in small groups, some whispering among themselves, others glancing back at the new chief, as if still trying to place where they'd seen him before. Darren didn't move. He sat frozen in his chair, staring blankly ahead. How had this happened? How had the man he had degraded so casually turned out to be this? Him? Darren thought back to the previous day, retracing every word he'd said, every gesture. He could still see the spit on the man's shoe. He had assumed that man was a nobody, a visitor, a passerby. It never occurred to him that he might be someone important, someone powerful. Eventually, Darren forced himself to stand and stumbled back to his desk. He kept his head down the rest of the day, barely speaking, avoiding eye contact. The station felt colder now, less familiar. For the first time in years, he didn't feel untouchable. He felt exposed. Later that afternoon, a message popped up in his inbox. "Chief Tate would like to see you in his office, 3:15 p.m. The words hit him like a fist to the chest. He tried to rationalize it. Maybe it wasn't about yesterday. Maybe it was just routine. But he knew better. His mind raced. Should he apologize? Deny it? Would anyone believe him if he said he didn't recognize the chief? Probably not. Maybe he'd get a warning, maybe a write-up, maybe worse. At exactly 3:15, Darren knocked on the chief's office door, hands clenched tightly behind his back. "Come in," came the voice from inside. He opened the door and stepped into a room filled with quiet authority, books neatly arranged on shelves, citations on the wall, a photo of a young Marcus Tate shaking hands with a former mayor. The oddest chief stood behind his desk, arms crossed, watching him enter. "Officer Holtz," he said, his tone neither friendly nor hostile, just measured. Darren nodded stiffly. "Sir." There was a long pause. Chief Tate studied him, then walked slowly around the desk and leaned against the front of it, folding his arms. "You know why you're here?" Darren swallowed. "Yes, sir." Chief Tate said nothing for a moment. Then, "Yesterday you spat on a man." You spoke down to him. You assumed things about him because of how he looked, where he was, and who he was speaking to. That man, he said, pointing to himself with a small gesture, is your superior now. Darren felt his face flush. He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. I'm not here to humiliate you, the chief continued. That would be too easy. What I want to know is this. Are you capable of change? Or are you so used to hiding behind a badge that you've forgotten who it's supposed to protect? Silence filled the room again. Chief Tate stood upright. Starting tomorrow, you'll be reporting to our Community Outreach Division. You'll be working directly with the neighborhoods you patrol. You'll listen, not lecture, and I'll be watching. Darren opened his mouth to respond, but Tate raised a hand to stop him. Dismissed. And with that, Darren turned and walked out of the office, a very different man from the one who had walked in. The sun had dipped lower in the sky by the time Darren Holtz left Chief Marcus Tate's office, casting long shadows across the station. Walls. He moved like a man untethered, shoulders tense, jaw tight, mind racing. The words echoed in his head over and over. You'll be working directly with the neighborhoods you patrol. You'll listen, not lecture, and I'll be watching. For the first time in his career, Darren wasn't being praised for his toughness, or given a wink for keeping people in line. He was being held accountable, and not by a counsel or a complaint form, by the very man he had humiliated. Without a second thought, he sat in his cruiser that evening, staring out the windshield at nothing in particular. His reflection in the rearview mirror looked unfamiliar. Older, maybe. More hollow. The badge on his chest felt heavier than it ever had, like it was pressing into his ribs. He didn't know what to feel. Shame, defensiveness, anger, regret. They swirled together inside him in a way that made his stomach knot. The next morning, Darren showed up to the precinct in uniform, but without the swagger that usually accompanied him. He didn't crack jokes in the locker room. He didn't nod to the other officers with that half-smirk that said he ran things on the street. Instead, he clocked in quietly and waited for instructions. At 9 a.m., a sergeant handed him a new assignment folder. You're on community detail now. Report to Officer Linda Vargas at the community center. She'll be your supervisor, the IA. Irony hit him like a punch to the gut. The community center, the very same one where everything had unraveled. He nodded without speaking and made his way there, his feet dragging just slightly. The center was already busy when he arrived. Kids in the rec room, volunteers setting up tables, seniors filing in for their morning bingo game. There was laughter, noise, music playing faintly through the hallways. It wasn't the kind of chaos Darren was used to. It wasn't dangerous. It was alive. Officer Linda Vargas spotted him from across the room. She was Latina, maybe mid-30s, with kind eyes, but a firm posture. She approached with a clipboard and didn't waste time on pleasantries. You're late, she said flatly. Let's get this clear right now. I don't care what you did before, and I don't care who you think you are. Here, you're part of a team. You earn your respect by serving, not barking orders. Got it? Darren nodded. Got it. She handed him a vest that read, Community Liaison on the back. Good. We're leading a neighborhood cleanup with the kids today. Pick up trash, paint fences, hand out water. Don't talk unless someone talks to you first. And just like that, Darren was out on the streets again. But not in the way he knew. No patrol car, no radio calls, just a trash picker. In his hand, a black garbage bag slung over his shoulder, and the quiet discomfort of being seen in a completely different light. People looked at him differently now. Some with curiosity, some with disbelief, a few with open disdain. "Look who decided to help," one older man muttered as Darren passed. "Is that him?" whispered a teenage girl, not bothering to hide her contempt. The kids he walked beside kept their distance. They knew who he was. A few had been there the day he spat on the chief. One boy in particular, maybe 12 or 13, looked at him with narrowed eyes every time their paths crossed. Darren couldn't blame them. He wouldn't trust himself either. The hours dragged. His hands blistered from hauling garbage bags. His back ached from bending over and pulling weeds. He was hot, thirsty, and exhausted. No one thanked him. No one offered praise. This was a different kind of work. Quiet, humbling, thankless. By late afternoon, they returned to the community center, dirty and tired. Vargas gave him a curt nod. "You didn't complain. That's a start. Tomorrow you'll be helping with the after-school mentoring program. Don't screw it up." That night, Darren sat on his couch staring at the muted television. The usual satisfaction he felt after a long day was gone. He wasn't sure what had taken its place. Something quieter, heavier, like a weight in his chest. He thought of Chief Tate, of how calm he had been, how dignified, how he had responded to hate with grace and strength. Darren had spent his whole life thinking power came from intimidation. But Marcus Tate had shattered that illusion with a look. The next day brought more of the same: kids, elders, community leaders, volunteers. Darren was assigned to help middle schoolers with homework and sports drills. He felt awkward, like a guest in someone else's house. But he showed up, followed instructions, kept his mouth shut. One afternoon, the same boy who had been glaring at him all week finally spoke up. "You think you can just come here and act like you're one of us?" the boy asked. "You don't belong here." Darren looked at him, choosing his words carefully. "You're right," he said. "I don't. Not yet. I don't expect you to trust me. I just want to try." The boy didn't say anything back, but his glare softened slightly. That night, Darren thought about that moment more than anything else. It was the first time he'd told the truth to someone without hiding behind his uniform. Weeks passed. Slowly, the tension began to ease. A couple of the older men started greeting him with nods. The kids began asking him questions. One even asked if he'd played basketball in high school. Darren said yes, he'd been good actually. They challenged him to a game. He lost, but they laughed with him, not at him. He started listening more, really, listening. He heard about housing issues, school funding gaps, food insecurity. These weren't complaints. They were people asking for dignity, for help, for someone to care. Eventually, he was called back to Chief Tate's office. The chief was standing by the window when Darren entered. "How's the community treating you?" he asked without turning. Darren stood straight, but not defensive. "They've been honest," Tate nodded. "Good. That's more than most departments get." There was a pause. "I can't undo what I did," Darren said finally. "But I want to do better. I don't know if I can fix it, but I want to try." Chief Tate turned then, his expression calm, but unreadable. "You'll have to prove it," he said simply. "Every day." Darren nodded. "I know." And as he left the office, there was no relief, no applause, no redemption arc tied in a E. Neat bow. But there was something real. The slow, difficult beginning of change. Not just for Darren, but for everyone watching.